everyone, welcome back to the Java course. Now, today we're going to be learning about inheritance and polymorphism. Now, those are two very big words in my opinion, but we're going to be going over them in a good amount of detail. So, let's just dive right into it. So, what exactly are we learning today? Well, we're learning about inheritance, obviously, and that is the only real thing we're going to be learning about today. But there are multiple subcategories that we need to go over. So first of all, we have superclasses and subclasses, which are basically the foundation of inheritance. Now, we'll also be going over is-a relationships to help us describe the relationship between superclasses and subclasses. Now, next we'll be going over this, extends, and the super keywords. And then lastly, we'll be going over method overriding. Method overriding is probably the coolest in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. So, first of all, what is inheritance? Well, inheritance has two things, a superclass and a subclass. So, a subclass is a class that takes its states and its behaviors from a superclass, and it will actually take these behaviors and states. For example, we have a student class and a high school student class. Now, let's say students don't normally have grades because this is like an alternative world, or rather, they don't have a GPA. So let's say a student would have a name, an ID, and a grade, while a high school student would have the same thing as a student, so a name, an ID, and a grade, as well as their GPA, something like that. So a high school student class would be a subclass, and it would take the grade, ID, and name variables from the student class, but it would also change it a little bit and give it its own GPA variable. Here are some examples of the difference between, well, rather the relationship between superclasses and subclasses. So here we have a ball, and a subclass would be baseball or football. Here we have a superclass of pizza, pepperoni pizza, meal lovers pizza. I've never even heard of what that is. Anyway, you can read what's on the slides there, but here are some good examples. So you can think of it as kind of like a category and a subcategory. Alright, so now we have is-a relationships. So subclasses can be classified as part or a extension of superclasses. Get it? Because we're going to be learning about extends later. Because of this, we can actually use the words is-a to define the relationship between a subclass and a superclass. So, for example, we have a high school student is a student. That's true. And a baseball is a ball. Okay, that's also true. So, let's get into the keywords here. This keyword, the extends keyword, and the super keyword. So first of all, we're going to go over the extends keyword. So the extends keyword is used when a subclass is declared. So this tells us that it's a subclass of another class. So for example, when we say public class high school, then we have to put after it extend student. And this tells us that a high school student is an extension, or rather a subclass of student. So here's an example here. I think I just said here twice, but that's okay. So here we can see two classes side by side. We have student and high school student. So the student has an ID and a grade and a name, and it's normal. So it has its constructor. Now we're going to be learning about this in a second, but for now, let's just say that this assigns to the instance variables here. And then we have student1 equals new student. All right, so we just create a new student here. Now on the right, we have high school student. And high school student extends student, and it has a new instance variable for its own class. So it's called GPA, and it's double. So when we're creating a high school student, we have student ID, student name, student grade, and student GPA. Now, if you notice, there is a super keyword here, and it's for these three variables. And then we have to assign our own GPA here. We have a get GPA, etc., etc. So now, what is super? What does this do? Well, let's take a look here. It's used when a subclass method wants to copy the things that a superclass method does, because remember, a constructor is a method. So we have super, student ID, student name, student grade. Now, if you notice, this superclass is student. The superclass of high school student is student. So it'll actually come over here and construct the student class and say, all right, it'll do this.id equals student ID, this.name equals student name, this.grade equals student grade. So we're basically taking this code and running it in one line. That's essentially what we're doing here, so that the high school student will get its student ID, name, and grade. Now remember that because this is a superclass of high school student, then this is inherited. So a high school student, even though it's not stated explicitly, it still has an ID, grade, and name in its class. So that's what we're doing here. And this is usually done just so that we don't have to rewrite code again. Because, man, writing one line versus writing 3 lines, this is a lot more efficient. So that's why we use the super keyword. Now, lastly, we have the this keyword. The this keyword is actually used when specifying a certain instance of the object. So if you need a refresher on what an instance of an object is, I recommend you go check out the last episode. But to try to summarize this a little bit, a instance is basically one of the objects. It's one object. So when we construct a student object, we set the properties for this certain object. We're not setting the properties for every single object, right? So we have this.id equals student ID. That means that this student instance will have this ID. All right. So note that this is actually a valid line. Now, you're probably wondering at first glance, well, of course, Brian, this is obviously a valid line. But notice that the second line says student2 equals new high school student. We're creating a student using the high school student constructor. Now, this is valid because a high school student is a subclass of a student. So you can use a subclasses constructor for a superclasses object. All right, so that's pretty cool and all. And now we're going to actually get into method overriding. Now, this is kind of cool, in my opinion. It is very cool. So what in the world is this? Well, let's take a look. We have student, and we have the method pass or fail. And if this dot grade, remember this keyword, so if this instance's grade is greater than 65, then return true, or otherwise return false. Now, note that this is just a small tip here. I didn't put an else statement here, and the reason why is because we don't need one. Because if this dot grade is greater than 65, return true. So as soon as it hits return true, it'll end the method. So that's why we don't need an else statement here. So that's just a little tip. But anyways, pass or fail. If this dot grade is greater than 65, then return true. Now, this is for student. In high school student, which is a subclass of student, we have the exact same method. That's kind of weird. So we have if this dot grade equals, or if this dot grade is greater than 80, return true, otherwise return false. Now, the reason this is interesting is because in our previous statement here, we have student1 equals new student, it's a normal student. Now this is a new high school student. So for student1, if I were to call the method pass or fail, it would choose this one because it's a student. This dot grade is greater than 65. Now on the other hand, if I were to choose if I were to call a method for student2, who is a high school student, then it would actually do pass or fail for the high school student method. So it'll come down to the subclasses method and actually execute that. So that's a pretty cool. I thought it was pretty cool, at least. So now let's get coding Brian here, and we're gonna just dive into a little bit more application rather than just looking into these slides. So all right, see you in a bit. All right, it turns out that coding Brian cannot come in today. He is a little sick, but anyways, I'll try to take care of the coding here. This is gonna be a little weird. So yeah, I guess I'm here now. So if we go take a look here, we have public student, pass or fail, yada yada. We've seen this in our slides before, and we have high school student. So we have the class high school student here. Now, let's say that I would create a new student named Brian, and he would have a grade of 75. Okay, fair enough. Now, let's say that we create a new high school student named Bob, and let's say his grade is also a 75. And let's say that his GPA is like 3. I don't know. GPA doesn't matter that much in this example here. So let's do system.out.println student1.pass or fail. So now this should call this method because we are in the student class and this is a student. So it'll say if this dot grade is greater than 65, then return true. So now this grade is greater than 65, so it should return true. And I'm just gonna put student pass or fail just to make sure that we are sure that we have the right student object. So now let's do high school student pass or fail. And this person has the exact same grade, but he is a high school student. So pass or fail. So now, remember last episode when I said that you can control click? So if I were to control click here, it'll take me here. Now if I were to control click here, it will take me back here, which is interesting. But if I were to run this, it would say false. Now, what? What even? So remember that this sometimes doesn't work. So pass or fail is calling the student pass or fail because this is a student. Now, on the other hand, we have a high school student here. So if we were to call pass or fail here, it would actually go to the subclass. And it would go here and say, all right, if this dot grade is greater than 80, return true. Otherwise, return false. All right. I mean, it makes sense. Now, let's actually create a new student here. And we're going to create one as an extension of the student that we already have. So let's have grad student. I don't know, grad student, college student, doesn't really matter that much. Now, we're going to put extend student. Now, we need to have the same constructor, right? So we have our constructor here that takes its constructor off of the student constructor with the student ID, student name, student grade. Now, what does a grad student have that is unique? Well, let's have a string degree. Sure. So now we have string degree, or string grad degree. And then we'll say this dot degree equals grad degree. All right. So that works. Now, let's say we wanted to get the grad degree. So public string get degree return degree. All right, so that's what we're going to be doing here. Now let's create a new student, and it's going to be a new grad student. And let's see, their ID is going to be 3. Let's make it Ria because Ria is cool. 75 3. Okay. So let's see, what do we have here? We have, oh right, this has to be CS degree. It doesn't really matter that much, so let's just have CS degree. Now, what do you think would happen if I did this? System.out.println grad student pass or fail. Okay. What would happen here if I had pass or fail? Which method would it choose? Now, if I were to run this, she has a 75 right now, so if it runs this method, it'll give true because it's greater than 65. But if it runs this method with the high school student, it'll give me false because it's not greater than 80. So let's run this. All right, it's true. Now, why? And how does that work? Well, because grad student doesn't have a method that says, oh, you know, give me your pass or fail grade. Now, what happens is that it goes to the student class, because this is it's not method overriding because the method doesn't exist in the subclass. So this is the superclasses method, and it calls this instead. So that's the method overriding thing. And remember that we have a degree, but then its instance variables are still copied from the student, the ID, the name, and the grade. So I hope I did a decent job explaining this. I'm not as good as coding Brian is. I don't even know where he is right now. Yeah, but that's all there is to it. So I'll see you in like 2 seconds for the ending. Oof, all right, we're back. So what's actually really interesting now is that we are almost done. I think I have 2 or 3 more episodes of Java until we are actually done with the Introduction to Java course, and that'll be it. Because we've already covered variables, loops, and basically all of object-oriented programming, or rather all the basics. But I'm not going to be ending it after 2 or 3 episodes. So I'm actually curious as to what questions you guys have, because I'm pretty sure that my explanations can be really confusing sometimes. So if you are confused, feel free to just comment in the, comment box below, and I'm always going to be taking a look at that, and I could make extra videos just to tackle some serious questions that you guys have. So until then, thank you for watching, and I guess I'll see you next week. Alright, see ya!